Hello, I'm Bridget Blankley, an early career researcher, author, and currently also a student at the University of Aberdeen. This presentation examines the ways in which we tell stories of child soldiers and asks if memoir, fiction, or maybe fictionalized memoir is the most engaging way to tell these stories to young people. This presentation is partly based on the research which underpinned my doctoral thesis, Black Star Rising, a fictional retelling of people involved in Ghana's independence, which is available in the University of Southampton's library. Who is a child soldier? Charities define soldiers as any person under the age of 18 who is a member of, or attached to, government forces, or any other regular or irregular force or political group. By this measure, about 250,000 boys enlisted in the British Army during World War One. My grandfather was among them, and still recalled it right up until his death, the trauma of the events. This definition also means that 46 countries, including the UK, the USA, Canada, and New Zealand, currently allow children, that is 16 or 17-year-olds, to serve in their armed forces. Yet this is rarely the image that comes to mind when we think of child soldiers. Generally, we think of a young boy or girl from an African country, kidnapped by insurgents and forced through coercion, violence, or brainwashing into acts of unimaginable violence, and who is never able to fully reintegrate into society. This image is partly driven by media coverage and partly by the legacies of a colonial mindset that paints Africa as a place of untamed cruelty, where children have little or no intrinsic value and where violence is endemic, and which contrasts this with the civilized West, mainly Europe and North America, where these damaged children can be safe and heal. I could obviously discuss this further and drill down into detail. However, time and content restraints mean that I must leave this as a comment for now, supported as it is by research such as that by Tatiana Porokova Conrad in her 2021 paper, Child Soldiers in Transatlantic Graphic Narratives of War. And I will instead focus on another stereotype of the child soldier. That is the unwilling victim forced to take up arms in a cause that they are not interested in. This is undoubtedly true, at least for some. One such was Ricky Richard Anywar, who was the inspiration for Keeley Hutton's novel Soldier Boy. And I am not arguing with the accepted legal position that child soldiers are always victims. However, it must also be said that some child soldiers choose to take up arms for reasons of bravado, social status, or as Ishmael Beth tells us in his memoir A Long Way Gone, by revenge. Having considered the definition of the child soldier, we should also ask who should tell their stories, how they should be told, and indeed, if these stories should be told at all. There is a debate around the issues of who owns personal or historical stories, both within academia and in the wider literary world, something that I became inadvertently aware of when my first book about a Nigerian orphan was published. This is something that Jeannie Cummings, a white American author who wrote American Dirt, a novel which was about the Mexican immigrant experience, very publicly showed. Her book was praised and vilified in equal measure, praised on the Oprah Winfrey Book Club for helping the reader to relate to the experiences of the migrant community, whilst at the same time vilified by many Latinx writers for cultural appropriation. The book has become almost an archetype for the danger of taking someone else's story for your own benefit. So is this controversy also applicable to the telling of child soldier stories? Without doubt, yes, and without doubt, only sometimes. Firstly, I'll consider who's been telling these stories. We can perhaps divide the authors into three distinct categories: unconnected adults with or without appropriate heritage, adults who themselves were once child soldiers, and finally a sort of halfway house, that is to say, unconnected adults who have interviewed or cooperated with ex-soldiers, all of which have both merits and shortcomings. When we read the memoirs of child soldiers, we're faced with two, or maybe I should say at least two questions. How accurate are these memoirs? And what is the reason for writing them? Stacey Hind, in her 2021 paper, Trauma, Violence and Memory in African Child Soldier Memories, reminds us that child soldier memoirs raise both ethical and methodological debates, truthfulness and then about truthfulness, and then classifies these memoirs into a number of genres, including therapeutic writing, testimony, human rights reporting, campaigning, coming-of-age narratives, and post-colonial histories, some of which may be considered as a means of, of, of slighting empathy in other children, and some which do not. These classifications remind us that both memory and intention can move the line that we habitually draw between story and history. These memoirs, therefore, sit somewhere between personal truths and narratives that are specifically crafted to prompt a predetermined emotional response in the reader, something that we may perhaps call pseudo-truths. What then of novels written by unconnected adults? Like most children's literature, these books have embedded within them a great untruth, namely that they represent childhood through the eyes of adults and not through the eyes of the child. They are a step further away from reality than that, though. The writer is having to imagine situations that are completely outside their lived experience. I do not suggest that this is impossible. After all, Val McDermid is, to the best of my knowledge, not a mass murderer, and yet her novels are said to depict murders and murderers very realistically. Nonetheless, this disconnect between reality and imagination must be acknowledged. We are left then with the third category, which I tend to think of as inspired fiction. This has the advantage of being embedded in reality without being wholly reliant on the memory of a single individual. The best of both worlds, perhaps, but also perhaps the worst of both. Still telling a partially and curated truth, but without the personal knowledge and detail from the memoir. How then do we best engage children and young adults with the terrible reality of the lives of child soldiers? Here again, I must admit some personal bias. I am, after all, a writer of young adult fiction. But putting my personal feelings aside, I do not believe that there is a right answer to this question. Much as there are books for every type of reader, there are also advantages and disadvantages to every type of book that they may choose to read. Firstly, considering the question of memoir or fiction. Memoir must of course be considered to be closer to the truth, something that will appeal to some, possibly older, readers. His books are generally written for those readers ready to put themselves into the shoes of the protagonist, no matter how uncomfortable those shoes turn out to be. They're for readers looking for a lived experience, a truth about the situation that is more real, even though it is never possible for a single truth to be called the truth. It's just a truth. You need a lot of accounts to get to the truth. Events such as location, the nature of the conflict, and the motivation of the author will all impact on the veracity of any memoir. Perhaps I'm being disingenuous. No book, fact or fiction, can ever tell the whole story. However, I still believe that the motivation for writing can have a profound impact on the resulting book. The clear advantage of presenting these stories in novels is that novelists, at least the successful ones, know how to tell engaging stories. There is more of a chance, I believe, that a fictionalized account will have a coherent plot, and the action will be both swift enough to maintain the reader's interest, and yet contain enough pauses to avoid overwhelming them. Of course, good editing or a skilled ghostwriter may support the memorist more in achieving these things, but the balance, I believe, is in favour of the professional writer. As to the question of text or image as the main means of storytelling, personally, I'm a fan of what I like to call real books. A conceited attitude, perhaps, but I believe that the best images are those I create in my own head. However, I do appreciate that this is not a universal belief. My youngest grandson, for example, balks at having to read any book without action-packed illustrations, and I finally learnt not to try and buy him anything that doesn't have plenty of pictures, so I buy him graphic novels. But I still buy text-based novels for his older brothers. It seems to be that it is, as they say, different strokes for different folks. It was Barbara Foley that reminded us that fiction is the sugar coating on a barely palatable pill of reality. That being the case, when we try and read about something as traumatic as the lives of modern-day child soldiers, many of us need this sugar before we're able to bear the unpalatable truth of so many lost childhoods. Thank you for listening to this presentation, and finally I include the references for some of the papers I've mentioned. I'd also like to apologise for any background noise in the